Warning. The following content may be disturbing to some people and entertaining to others. Watch with caution. What's the darkest side of humanity you've ever seen? It's probably nothing compared to the other story shared here, but what I witnessed is pure darkness and cruelty that lies in some people's souls. So 3 years ago, I was driving in the countryside on my way home. I was on a very quiet road when I noticed a group of ducks crossing the road, so I stopped to let them pass. Soon after, I saw a man driving towards me from the other side. I used my headlights to signal him to stop and let the ducks pass. He also saw the ducks because he was responding to my request to stop. He slowed down as he approached the ducks, but then suddenly accelerated, killing a large number of ducklings. I felt sick to my stomach witnessing the carnage. And while he was driving beside me, he was smiling, as if he was proud of himself. I got out of my car and tried to say something, but he sped off. Some people are just messed up. So this one time I found an anti-stress sponge ball with a smiley face on it, lying around in the ground. Without much thought I picked up the ball and squished it cause well, it's spongy, you know. Guess what? My hand started bleeding because there were a bunch of nails inside. I figured these were placed there to harm others that wanted to pick the toy up. This act must come from the lowest, darkest side of humanity. The Rwandan genocide took place in April 1994. They have a couple memorials, where they used to keep corpses. I was shown a large brown stain on a wall and was informed that this wall was where they swung infants to kill them by bashing their brains. I still cannot fathom that 800,000 people were butchered in the space of a month and a half, all by hand. Machete. Horrific. When I was 10, my babysitter, 16 female, died in a traffic accident. She was also my neighbor's daughter. The girl's mom was of course heartbroken. Since the girl who died was a known girl, her address was in the newspaper so people knew where to send their respect letters. During the night of the condolences ceremony, burglars broke into my neighbor's home, while everybody was at the ceremony, and stole whatever they could find, including stuff from her daughter that had just died. After finding out what happened, I developed a very dark and disgusted view on humanity from a young age. Now, I've been asked to watch over a grieving family's home during the funeral services several times for this exact reason. People are opportunistic monsters. The Kosovo War 1998 to 1999 was an armed conflict in Kosovo, between Serbia and Kosovo Albanian rebel groups. Serbian forces raped, killed and tortured almost 1 million Kosovo Albanians. My cousin, a U.S. Marine, was in Kosovo during this ethnic cleansing. He has never been the same. Before he left, he was always lighthearted and hilarious. After the war, he couldn't even get a job. He took his own life in the early 2000s, as he couldn't handle the horrors he saw. I worked in community care. A patient, let's call him John, I looked after was a schizophrenic who had spent most of his life in institutions but was now living in the community with a dedicated team. His illness was such that he had no way of discerning thoughts or dreams from reality. It was all the same to him. Like a lot of people with his condition, he grew up being predated upon by all those around him but mostly by his alcoholic father, who would rape him on a regular basis. He was in his early 50s when I met him, a seriously damaged man but also a wonderful character when you got to know him. When he went to bed at night the nightmares would begin and you'd hear him crying and screaming in his sleep, "No, Daddy no." The abuse was never in the past for him, it was always there in his head, as real as everything else. One day I was sitting alone with him in the car and he started talking to me. He wanted to get something off his chest. When his dad died, the whole family, who were terrified of him, were sitting in the house with him. His dad started having a heart attack, and pretty soon it became obvious to the rest of the family. No one spoke, they just all sat there as the father struggled and gasped for help but no one would get up to help him. They all just sat in silence and watched him die. John was crying when he asked me if he'd done something wrong. I reassured him he hadn't. ER doctor here. I once saw a 2-year-old child. He was the cutest boy I've ever seen. Green eyes, long curly blonde hair and a very cheerful personality. Everybody in the ER loved him. Apparently his parents left him without any food or water and they went for a vacation. A neighbor heard him crying and called the police. They broke in, found the boy and took him to ER. He was beaten up, there was blood dripping from his left ear. There were multiple other old wounds all around his body. And still, he just wanted to play with me, he just wanted some love, he tried to hold my hand. I broke down, called my senior to continue examining him. I have seen teenage suicides, homicides, all kind of shit. But this broke something inside of me. The day after Christmas sale at a major department store. Everything was half price. A woman fell on the floor, because of a heart attack. People continued shopping, stepping over her. Store employees had to form a circle around her to try to get her blocked off from the crowd. Ambulance crew had to nearly fight their way through the crowd to get to her. No one would move. The attempt to rescue her took far longer than it should have. Even when she was on the gurney being taken out, people were still shoving the crew. I worked in child protection, so I saw a lot. I've seen once an 8-year-old that ended things because of the horror she witnessed. I work as a firefighter paramedic. One of my worst calls was for a disturbance between an wife and the husband. He was hitting her, while drunk as f***, and they were both so belligerent we couldn't figure out what was wrong till the wife started to finally make words instead of scream and she said, "He killed my baby." We didn't know there was a child in the house. We hadn't even been in the house. We run inside and find the child in the crib. He drowned it by pouring paint over it, like buckets and buckets and buckets of paint. We tried CPR, but in vain. The child was pronounced at the hospital. The origin of the murder and assault. She refused to give the drunk man a blowjob. He killed their child, for a blowjob. 2 years ago, a girl from my school got raped by 3 guys, who filmed everything and posted the video online. One dude committed suicide and the other 2 had fled the country. Most of my school has seen it and she is living in severe depression and social anxiety. So sad. In 1983, I watched a mob drag a man out of his car, beat him up, and set him on fire. I was 9. In 1988, I watched bodies float down the river, and people who had been tied to telephone poles and set on fire with tires. I was 15. In 1990 and 2000, I helped drag bodies out of 2 bomb sites. I was 17 and 26. By the way, I am from Sri Lanka. We have national PTSD here. Humanity sucks. There was a shooting where the dad got jealous of his wife going out with friends. He then got his gun and murdered his wife, his infant son, and his neighbor, who was running away with the boy before blowing his brains out. If that wasn't bad enough, his cranial bones turned to shrapnel and caused a cut on his daughter's arm, who was hiding behind a car. I remember picking her up and taking her to my unit while she cried for her mom. She begged me to keep her safe and I could only tell her that she was safe with me. I made her a bunny glove to make her smile on the way to the hospital. I cried in the bathroom after. I hated myself for not being able to do more for her. I eventually realized that I did all anyone could do in that situation. I still hate that fucker though, and I want him to rot in hell. I was in a ward with a 3 or 4-year-old. His mom had given him caustic soda in his bottle. It melted half his tongue away. He lived in a hospice with some nuns and he'd come in weekly to have his tongue stretched in the hopes he'd be able to talk one day. He was cute as a button. I wonder how he's doing. He'd be in his 20s now. My mother was abused by my grandfather for years when she was a little girl. He never went to prison for it because she really didn't have any other family left. Decades later, my mom has basically moved on and is trying not to mention it. He visits our house for Christmas. If you forget what he did, he's just this nice, though annoying old man. He's 82 now. My mom decided to drive him back to his home alone. On the way back, they discussed that topic. He basically dismissed it and said, "I don't know why you're complaining, you enjoyed it." She was 7 at the time. I am thankful I wasn't in the car, because I'd be in jail for murder right now. That's such a fucked up thing to say. So evil. When I lived in New York, I was hopelessly addicted to heroin. There, it comes packaged in bundles of little envelopes with stamps on them to signify which batch the dope was from. At some point, dealers started spiking the heroin with fentanyl. If someone died off a particular bag, all the junkies, including myself, would rush to find out what the stamp was and who was selling the stamp so we could go get that specific dope. The theory was that if someone died from it, then it was strong and good. This was the insanity of the disease of addiction which I thrived in for quite some time. Not nearly as bad as anything else I've read here, but the ATM-like machine in a Vegas casino that lets you take out a second mortgage on your home was easily one of the most evil things I've seen. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more stories.